Today it's early Christian worship and symbolism descending into the crypts. And we'll be going to San Clemente in Rome. And as everyone knows, we like to give everybody the lay of the land so they know where they are. Many of you have been to Rome, and for those who have not, it's a very small town. You can see Vatican City is a very small little part of Rome. And of course, like a lot of our major cities in the United States and around Europe, there is the Beltway, the Ricordo, that is around Rome. You can see the airport, and now we see the city of Rome. We always begin pilgrimage from the tomb of St. Peter, so that's Vatican City. And where are we going to go today? We're going to go through ancient Rome, and we're going to go to the Basilica of St. Clement or San Clemente. And so, Jan, I now turn it over to you. It's a short walk. I know you don't like it when I say that because it's the heat of Rome right now. It's 2.5 miles if we were to walk it ourselves from the Basilica from Vatican City across ancient Rome. It's a bit hot today, so we'll be able to be in the comfort of our homes as you take us inside.
It will be quite a hike, but we do have to earn our evening spaghetti, right? So
that's right.
I guess it will be today we will continue somewhat our itinerary that we began last pilgrimage, which was talking about the liturgy and some of the symbolisms that go with the liturgy of the early Christian church. Deborah, we still have a little bit of feedback. I don't know if that is your computer or just letting you know. It's better now. So we will link to some of the things we've already said. For those who have not made the first pilgrimage to this topic, I think I will give you the references, so it's not going to be a problem. But the best place to talk about the early liturgy is the place where we see many frescoes dealing with the liturgy, and one of the very important first popes in Rome, and one of the most important first saints in Rome, and that is Saint Clement, San Clemente. So you see him here right now. So we'll go to his basilica, which is a gem. It's really a gem in Rome. And many people, when I came to Rome, many people told me, "Oh, you got to go to Rome. You got to go to San Clemente. You got to go to San Clemente." And I was like, "Yeah, there's so many churches that I haven't seen yet, and why would I go to San Clemente? It's not like that famous and that important." And then I went after, I don't know, like 4 years being here, and then I wish I would have gone the first day that I came. So I'm going to take you on quite the adventure today. So you'll see here the corner of San Clemente, and it's kind of a strange view maybe to look at it, but you wouldn't be actually able to see the church at all walking from where we just came from the Vatican. You would just see a wall. And so this is a very fitting view, because St. Clemente is basically walled in. But what you can see very well is the two different entrances. One is underneath the tower on your left, which is street level of Rome. And one is the actual entrance that was there before the 16th century, and that is about, like 10 feet lower. Okay, so we have to descend the stairs, and that's what you see on the right, where that grid is and the two columns, right? So we're going to enter through that entrance, even though it's closed, but we have the special entrance. So we're going to go through that entrance now and go to the atrium, and maybe then I can give you just a general history about the church, just that you know where we're at. So we just entered the gate, and you can see the basilica now is behind you. Obviously, we're looking from the... No, can we go back? Can we go back one? Thank you. And the basilica is behind us. Okay, so what we look at is the atrium of the church. Many early Christian basilicas have this atrium, and it's not just a structural remnant from the early Roman houses, which all had an atrium as well, so this inner courtyard, but this is actually also a place where we need to get ourselves ready to enter the church. We've seen that in our tour in St. Peter's Basilica, that the outside, the immediate outside of the church is a place of cleansing. So if you were a catechumen in the time of St. Clement, then you wouldn't actually be able to enter the church. You would have to wait till you receive baptism, all right, around the time of Easter, and then you could come in. Before that, you had to wait outside. They would close the doors after the gospel, okay, for the Eucharistic celebration, and you would listen, but you could not see yet. You could only see after you were completely becoming, well, a complete member of the church with baptism. So, and this is the place that today is under the administration and care of the Dominican order. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the different orders of the church. One of them, very famous, is the Dominican order, founded by Saint Dominic. That's why they're called Dominicans. And with the Franciscans that we've already mentioned, Father Anthony is right there with them right now in Assisi, and basically the second most important mendicant order of the Middle Ages. Many famous saints are Dominicans. Saint Albert the Great was a Dominican. Pius V was a Dominican. Thomas Aquinas was obviously a Dominican. And so the Dominicans have this as a third house in Rome. So they have the University of St. Thomas Aquinas. They have the church Santa Maria sopra Minerva, which is their convent, and then they have this church as well. So this church was given to them actually in the 17th century, about 1677, when Oliver Cromwell went to Ireland and he tried to destroy the church there after the Reformation, right, after Henry VIII. So Cromwell expelled many of the religious orders, and so the Dominicans went to the Pope and they said, look, we need a place to stay. We were not safe at home, and so the Pope said, oh, you can take care of San Clemente, that'd be a good place for you. And so he sent them to this church, which up to this day still is under the care of the Dominicans. So if you do go around this time, it is 6:15, you will go, we will kind of stumble into one of them celebrating Mass, the evening Mass there. So the Dominicans still live there, and it's specifically the Irish Dominicans. Right now they have a community of about 15 Dominicans, and it changes every year a little bit, and specifically because some of them come to study, they finish their degree, they finish a doctorate, they finish a licentiate, they go back to Ireland and they send someone else over. So usually the community is between 15 and 25 people, and so that fits very well. Now this is also, and this is actually quite important, historically speaking, because during the Risorgimento, so during the big Italian civil war that was where many churches were destroyed or damaged anyways, this church was completely kept intact because the Dominicans could actually hoist the Union Jack, okay, the English flag, the flag of Great Britain, and therefore they could say this is actually not a church territory but the territory of England because they came from Ireland. So it's actually very important to make this tiny historic note. Very good. So now we can actually enter the church. You can see the floor plan of the church. And look at what we're gonna begin with today. So we are on the far right, where that atrium is with this big X. Okay, we just stood in that courtyard. We're gonna enter the church proper. Well, we're gonna look at the central ceiling. We're gonna look at the central nave, and then passing by also one of the side chapels with an image of the Virgin Mary in it. Now, I have to say, San Clemente in itself, and here you see it in its full glory unfolding before your eyes, San Clemente itself is special because it is a church which is built on top of another church that was discovered, and I'll tell you the story, which in fact was on top of an ancient Roman street. So we're going to descend many stories down into the earth today, okay? But what we start with is the 12th century basilica. So this is what we see right now. This is the 12th century basilica, and as many basilicas that were built around that time in the Middle Ages, it got a major facelift, which is it's visible in the columns and also in the ceiling, which is obviously much later, and that's from the 16th century. And 17th century. So after the Baroque, it was a trend in Rome that you kind of slap new art on the old medieval churches. So what we see here is obviously not a 12th century building, but a much younger, quote unquote, 400 years only old church. So what you can see here is obviously the old structure of the basilica, and this is very important already for the liturgy, right? The liturgy, we talked about the importance of the altar. In the last tour, we talked about the importance of the bishop. Now, this would be a place where the Pope, and this is named after Pope, obviously, come to celebrate Mass. What do you do? What's the first thing that you do when you celebrate Mass? You go through the main nave of the church. And you can see in this structure, in this very classic Roman basilica structure, you have one main nave that has lots of space for the procession, and then you have the two side naves left and right, which then in turn have oftentimes side chapels. So you would go and you would focus to the front, you would focus to the back, to the apsis, right? You would look up, right? And like in prayer, you would look up, and what would you see? If you stand here and you were the Pope in the 12th century, what would you look up to? You would look up to the cross. Pretty exactly. You look up, and the first thing that you see is is indeed the cross. It's a cross in the apsis, right, over the sanctuary, and so that is what we are going towards. A pilgrimage is always like a walking towards a goal. What is our goal? Is ultimately meeting Jesus in heaven. Now here, Jesus is in the cross, but I'll give you a little bit more detail once we go closer. What you also see is down below is a little baldacchino, okay, much humbler than the one in St. Peter's Basilica, obviously, and you can see the walled-in choir. Looks a little bit weird, maybe to you, you have maybe not seen this before, but this is a very classical, monumental choir, okay? So in the center, it's surrounded by marble walls, and you have three ambos, so three different places from where you can read either the prayers of the hours, the liturgy of the hours, or obviously the reading and the gospel during Mass. Now, there's actually three ambos. We know liturgically why there are two. The third one is actually kind of a mystery. No one knows why that's there, if that was added later, or if that actually had a function specifically reserved for that ambo. So usually you have two ambo, not three. But that's just San Clemente. Now, if you were here, again, the Dominicans would be present, then they do sit in this choir, and they do pray together in that walled-in choir, right? So very good. So I think we can go a little bit further. Oh yeah, of course. Well, the floor, the very floor that we're treading on, if you look down, is a so-called Cosmotesque floor, which was very fashionable in the 12th century. If you were a noble and you could afford it, then you would have someone from the Cosmati family come over and do your floor like this. This was the fashion, okay? Everyone would come in for your cocktail parties. They would look down and be like, ha, you got it. Like, you nailed it, right? This is amazing. So obviously, the most precious floor that the church then used for their churches, for the most important place where God dwells. And so this is a Cosmotesque floor. And you can see the tiny colors, like the color differences. You can see the kind of greenish marble and reddish marble and grayish marble, and then different kind of shades of red as well. And those are all taken from tiny pieces from remains that were found in Roman temples, right? That kind of dilapidated. They were left there to fall apart, and many of the Romans said, okay, well, we're going to use the material. They used the stones, they used the brick, they used the tufa stone, they used the marble, and the Christians said, great, we'll take some of the marble and we'll create this beautiful floor. So this is the floor that you're treading on, by the way. So very, very fancy. It's we'll see this in many of the basilicas that we visit. And then this is the Madonna, very famous. I don't know, Deborah, do you have this depiction of the Madonna kind of recreated on prayer cards or something in the States very often? I feel in Italy it is common, but I don't know if it's the same for the States.
No, we do. We see this quite a bit.
So yeah, so this is Giovanni Battista Sassoferrato, and he has very beautiful Madonna. So if you Google him later, you can find a bunch of other depictions, and they're all very, very pretty in my opinion. So it's a good place to stop. This is on the right. Very good. Now let's focus here on the symbols, okay, and on the meaning of the symbols. And I'll tie it back to St. Clement a little bit later in the tour, when we actually go further down into the crypt, if you allow me. So, what do we do in Mass? Actually, no, that's not a good way of starting it. I should start a different way. The medieval person, for the medieval person, the world was fundamentally symbolic. Everything in the world meant something symbolic. And if you knew what it meant, then you had the knowledge that would allow you to understand God. If you did not understand what the world symbolizes, well, then you were ignorant and you had no idea where God left the traces. So what's very important is to understand for the medieval person that everything has a meaning. Everything that is put in art is not just put there for decoration to look pretty, but is put there because it has a very specific symbol. Oftentimes a symbol that predates the Middle Ages by 100, 200, 400, 500 years, sometimes 600 years, goes back to the 3rd century catacombs that we visited last time. So when we look at something like this, everything has a place, everything has a meaning. And this goes back to the idea of the artist, right? Who is the artist? The artist is someone, even though today we may have forgotten that a little bit with contemporary art, the artist is someone who unlocks the secret of beauty, is someone who unlocks like a deeper vision of reality that maybe not everyone sees. And maybe you have had that with art before, where you look at art and you look at something and you're like, and then you like learn about it, you're like, wow, like the artist really understood what this meant. That's crazy. And now I can, because of the artist, he showed me. So now I can understand. And so the same is true for medieval art, because the medieval person thought that's exactly what creation is. Creation is the artwork of God, the Creator. So if you want to understand how God works, what God thinks about all day, what God is, who God is, then you need to look at what he does. You get to know the artist by looking at his work of art. So you get to know God by looking at creation. There's a very famous quote that I might have actually already said in a previous story, so forgive me for those who have already heard it. But it's one of my favorites, really, and I tell it to all my students. As St. Bonaventure said about the Bible, he said, what is the revelation of God? And you would obviously say, well, it's the Bible, it's sacred scripture. And Bonaventure answered differently. Bonaventure said, the revelation of God is nature, is creation. The Bible are just the footnotes, okay? It's only for those who don't really get it, right? Like, they don't really get creation, and then they have to read it. And I'm like, that's what he meant. Okay, got it. Okay, so the world is my sanctuary. Oh, now I get it. Well, for those of us who are attentive, they can just look outside and they can see that the world is God's sanctuary. So that's the idea of the medieval person. Okay, that's all that I'm trying to say. So what are we looking at? Actually, Deborah, you have been to San Clemente, right?
Yes, I have.
So what do we see in the apsis? Do you have or maybe someone else, or maybe Father Anthony, what do we actually see in that dome, in that semi-dome? What can you see besides the cross? What's kind of the general view that we're looking at?
Oh, let me see.
No
Well,
cheating around.
we have Christ at the top.
Yep.
We have Peter.
Yeah.
To the right.
Yep.
We have an angel to the left of Christ.
Mm-hmm. And then below that.
Well, we have the four Gospels, the signs of the four Gospels, right?
Yeah, very nice.
Right? And here we have Paul to the left.
Okay. Yeah. What's below it? The whole in the semicircle.
In the semicircle.
Nice. There we go. Symbols of plants, nature, animals. Very good.
Creation.
Yes. Very good. More specifically, yes, everything that you all said was very perfect. Thank you for that comment there that popped up. So animals, plants. Where do you find animals and plants?
Nature.
Where are they? Say again? In nature, yeah. But more specifically, like today, where would you go? Like in your house, there are no animals and plants. I mean, they are, but where do you go? What is a biblical place where you find animals and plants? The garden.
The garden.
The garden. And this is the key. Yes, there you go. Eden. Very nice. So where is Eden? Eden is at the beginning of creation, right? The beginning of the world. And then Adam and Eve have to leave it. Okay, kind of a bummer. I heard it was kind of nice, right? Tons of trees, tons of fruit. Just have one tree, right? That you were not supposed to eat from. And it's like that. You got to read some patristic commentaries on this, because we always learn about like the one tree, right? So the whole Genesis kind of story focuses on the one tree. Okay, what Genesis does not talk about is the million other trees. Adam and Eve literally lived in the forest. There was a million trees with a million different fruits, everything that you can imagine, right? Bananas, pineapple, mango, everything, like dragon fruit, okay? Pomegranate, whatever you may invent, and more, right? And God is like, okay, that's all for you. Just that one tree, don't eat of that. And Adam and Eve, may God bless them. They're like, okay, we're not gonna. Oh man, that fruit sure looks good though. It's like, okay, God, and God is kind of like pulling his hair out, right? It's like, there's millions of trees, just don't eat from that tree. Anyways, so the idea is Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and that was paradise, earthly paradise. And now where that's gone, we're banished. We know that story. So where do we go back? Where does the bishop go back when he looks up in his procession to the cross? He goes back to the garden. He returns to paradise. And now it's not the Garden of Eden. Now it's not a place where God comes and goes and, and Adam and Eve are kind of hanging around. It's a place where God is always there and everything is through God, and God is actually the center. And that's exactly what we see. So when you look under the cross, there is a big bush kind of leaves, and all these leaves turn into these stylized lines that in turn turn into circles. And they circle around the whole thing, okay? Everything is from the one tree. All of the branches, all of the fruit, all of the leaves come from the one tree. What's the one tree? It is the cross. So the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden, which led to sin, now becomes the tree of paradise, the tree of the cross on which wood, right, on whose wood Jesus is nailed. So you have Christ in the middle on that tree, right? Left is, so looking at it as we do now, left is the Virgin Mary, right is John, as a reminder that those two were under the cross. You have Christ in the middle, being the center and the trunk of everything. And then you have 12 white doves representing the 12 apostles. Now, there's a tiny detail. You can make it out. But it's kind of hard to see, but you can make it out. Right on the top of the cross, right above it, there is a hand kind of coming out of nowhere, right? Kind of coming from this tiny hole in the ceiling, kind of reaching down, and that's God the Father. Before Michelangelo, remember, we don't see God the Father in art, in medieval art. Why not? Why do we never see God the Father? Why does Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, why is he the first one that personifies God the Father, not God the Son, God the Father? In the medieval understanding, you didn't need to see the Father, because the Father was one with the Son, and the Father creates through the Word. And the Word is God. The Word is Christ. The Word is everything that comes from the Father. And so through Christ, everything is created. So what we live in is already a revelation of God that happened through the Word, and that Word is Christ. And now, obviously, the Word is also in a book. It is the book of creation that Bonaventure spoke about. So there's the hand, though, just as a reminder, God is not absent, he is there and he's reaching under. He's, kind of, I don't know, probably want to feed one of the pigeons, right? They're hungry, so I'm just going to give them a little bit of the cute pigeons are cute. So, anyway, so you have the Garden of Eden. You have the Garden an unfolding. You have the garden of paradise, of heavenly paradise, and that's what you're focused in the liturgy. In the liturgy, we're not on earth. We're not. We ascend to heaven. And see, the early Christians understood this, and apparently the 12th century Christians understood this too. Because you're not focused on earthly things. You're not focused on the horizontal. You're focused on the vertical. You look up, you look to the cross, and you look to where the cross is in heavenly glory. What is heavenly glory? And we talked about this in St. Peter's. It is represented by gold. That explains the mosaic. You look at it and you're like, okay, yeah, that's a lot of gold. Well, that's because it is representative of heaven. So, like in every church, we have the apsis, so that's what we just explained. We have the triumphal arch, so that's what Deborah talked about. And so just to fill everyone else in, right in the center, very, very top, you have Jesus, again, in a blessing with his hand like this, right? Blessing the world, right? He is the creator, he blesses it, he sees it is good. In the left hand, he has a gospel, right, or the sacred scripture, and then we have the four symbols of the evangelists. So some of them are a little bit easier to see, some of them a little bit harder to see. So to Christ's left is an angel, to Christ's right is an eagle, right? So Matthew and John, and then one over to the left is a lion, Mark, and to the far right, looking at it to the far right, is the bull or an ox, representative of Luke. And then underneath you have two saints. You have the Agios Paulos sitting next to Saint Lawrence on the left, and it says it there, right? Saint Paul, so it's easy. They actually say it. And then on the right, Agios Petrus, Saint Peter, sitting next to Saint Clement. Okay, now, very unfortunately, it just cuts off what St. Clement has in his hand, what he's pointing at. And what is he pointing at? I can kind of give you a spoiler here. It's an anchor, and I'll get to that in a second. So he points. So we have the saints, right? And so everything is couched around this triumphal arch. The triumphal arch is something that we'll find in all major basilicas in Rome. And because you have to go through the arch, it's a pathway, right? It's a threshold to another world. So the arch is the gate, the arch is the door through which you go to this other world. That other world is represented by the garden, is paradise. So in the liturgy that goes on underneath, where the praying presbyter or the praying episcopoi, the praying priest or bishop, looks up, holds his hands up, he's looking into the garden. All right. No, that's good. I'm done.
I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. I do have a question.
Yes.
On either side of the hand, do you know what's that? It's a mirror on each side, right? So it's the same, one off to the either side and then two off. We can make out the lamb on the third.
Yes.
Do you know?
Yes. The lamb, yes. Well, lamb is a reoccurring symbol, and I think we have mentioned this. Whenever you see a lamb, you're reminded of the book of Revelation, so the apocalyptic lamb, which is Christ himself.
Right.
The lamb is a symbol that is reoccurring, which is symbolizing Christ. Another one that is very simple, that is symbolizing Christ, is the Good Shepherd. So Christ is kind of both. He's the shepherd and the sheep, right? And then if you want to see another animal, you go to the very bottom of the cross. You have the bush. Then you go even further down. There are two stags or two deer drinking from a water fountain coming from that bush. And those are the Old Testament deer, right? I'm not sure of the exact translation, but as the deer yearns for water, so my soul yearns for God, right? So that's also another symbol of Christ. So the deer also effectively is a symbol of Christ. I'm telling you, everything here is just about Jesus and creation. So good question, though. So now let's talk about our friend, Saint Clement. Now, Pope Clement, depending on which, and we can stay here, this is great. Here there's a question by Linda Smith, so I think I'm going to open the chat here. Adam and Eve, the question is, Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Paradise for sinning. So are you saying the garden is recreated in heaven, paradise golden? Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. By the redemption of Christ, by his sacrifice on the cross, the garden is reopened. But it's not just the Garden of Eden. It's not just the earthly paradise. It's now a heavenly paradise, a glorious state, exactly, which is a step up, right? So that's why St. Augustine could say, oh lucky sin that has given us such a grand Redeemer in the Easter liturgy, right? So he says, great, thank you that someone sinned so that now we get elevated to an even higher state than just the Garden of Eden. Not really mentioning that it's like an 80-year-long pilgrimage on earth, which has its toils. So, but yes, good question. Do we mean that? Yes, it's the recreation of the Garden of Eden. You got it. Now, depending on which tradition you follow, we don't have to go into all of that now, but let's just stick with Saint Jerome. Okay, he is a 4th century writer, patristic writer, translated the scripture into Latin, so I think he is a good source to keep. And he called Clement the 4th Bishop of Rome. Peter, Linus, Cletus, Clement, right? So if you sometimes hear the, what is it, the fourth? No, the second. Well, preface in Mass. Anyways, it's high prayer. Then you get to hear his name. Saint Clement is the 4th Bishop of Rome. He is supposed to have known Saint Peter personally. Okay, that's apocryphal, but something. And so he is evidently very, very important. He's most important. He's most important actually for his. Oh, we have. Deborah, we have the feedback again.
Yeah, someone became unmuted. If they could mute themselves, please.
All right. So the
Father Tony.
Father Tony, sorry, do you want to jump in?
No. They just muted him.
No, I just wanted to say it was the first Eucharistic prayer. That's the first Eucharistic prayer.
Yes. Thank you. All right, good. Well, you'll be more familiar with that. So
yeah, I think I say it more often than you do, I hope.
I think so. So so you obviously say the name of Clement there. Thank you, Father. So Clement is famous for a letter to the church in Corinth from the year 96. And so that's if we have that letter, so we do have a testimony, eyewitness testimony of this Pope, and so obviously the importance of him cannot be underestimated. Now, I had Deborah put in one of the slabs, the marble slabs from the choir. Do you remember the choir that we saw before? And it had like a marble wall. This is one of the walls, and this is a very cool little detail. I don't know if you can really make out the letters. I think you should be. But you can see a couple of letters here. We can see an S very easily. We can see an H very easily. We can see an O very easily. You can see an A very easily. Harder to see is the I. Right? There's an I in there as well, which is one of the bars from the H. What is that? What is this? Well, in the 4th century, one of the further successors of St. Peter and of Clement, for that matter, Mercurius, okay, named after the pagan god of Mars, a convert. Mercurius was a priest, and he wanted to donate something to the church. So he gave one of his probably sarcophagi marble slabs to the church, and he said, can use it for whatever you need. And so the church turned it into a wall for the choir. Now Mercurius actually ended up being elected pope after he was named a bishop. And so Mercurius said, okay, well, I'm going to be pope. I can't really keep my own name because my name is Mars, and Pope Mars would be a little bit strange, considering that that's the god of war for the Romans. So he said, I'm going to pick another name. I'm going to pick one of the saints. Who's my favorite saint? My favorite saint is John. So I'm going to be John the First. John in Latin is Johannes. And what you see here is the abbreviation, right, or not the abbreviation, but all of the letters of the word Johannes. So he became Pope John the First, and effectively instituting the tradition of a pope to change his name. So that's why, we have Pope Francis and not Pope George or Pope Jorge, right? Which would be in the case of Peter the same, because Peter just took his own name. Very good. So that's just a small detail that
That's a great detail, Jan. Thank you so much. What year was that again?
Ooh, that is it's 4th century, so 300 something, 40. Okay. I would have to look it up. Pope John the First. You can look him up.
Okay.
Very good. So here we have St. Clement, the fourth pope of the church, famous author of the letter of the Corinthians, and you can see him in heavenly glory. This is obviously the view from where we stood looking at the apse to the main church. This is the Baroque image that was added mid-17th century, and you can see him with his most iconographic or most iconographically important image, which is the anchor. So you have him in glory with his tiara on, and then underneath you have two angels, or maybe three angels, kind of hard to see here, two angels that are holding the anchor. So what about the anchor? What's happening there? Well, Clement was a convert, most likely. He became pope. Okay, and then he lived in Rome and he ruled in Rome, and he wrote his letters, as we know. Now the emperor was still not done persecuting the Christians, and this would be under Emperor Trajan. So Trajan expelled the highest Christian in town, which was the Pope, and so he expelled him to I have it written down here because it's a very difficult name. It is Chersonesus. Where is that? That was a Greek colony in what today is the Crimean Sea, or the Crimean Peninsula. So, the Pope was banished to there. So that was in the outskirts. That would have been very much the outskirts of the Roman Empire. So to an old Greek colony, and he was there working as a miner, or he at least was supposed to work as a miner, together with other prisoners. So he ended up working in a quarry, and there was one time where all of the workers, they were basically treated as slaves, were very thirsty. And so Clement prayed, and he said, God, can you provide some water, some fresh water? And so he saw a lamb on a hill. And so he stood up, he left the quarry, he went up the hill, and where the lamb was, he took his pickaxe and he beat the ground. And after beating the ground, fresh water immediately sprung forth, so all of the workers could drink. That was not so much in the interest of his prison guards, of the Roman prison guards. So because also most of his co-workers or co-slaves there converted. So the Romans took him and put an anchor on his neck and threw him in the Crimean Sea. And so that was his martyrdom. As you know, many martyrs, because that is the highest glory that you can receive in the church, are remembered by the instrument of martyrdom. And so the instrument of martyrdom in this case of St. Clement is the anchor. And you see the anchor everywhere in this church. You can see him, St. Clement holds him, obviously. You can see him here, held by the angels. Also on the baldacchino in the main church, you see it above the on the baldacchino, there's a little anchor. And so everywhere there's an anchor, as you can see. Thank you. Yes. So Robert just popped in, and he just sent the dates for John the First. Thank you very much. Good. So this is the outside, because now we're taking you down. We're going to go down into the lower level, which is the lower basilica. And so let's see what we can discover there. This is second level, as you can see. 4th century basilica, also a classic basilica cut, one main nave, two side naves, and we have a bunch of frescoes that I think will be very interesting for us to look at. So let's go all together with the Dominicans that are there, and we are descending into the depth. Now, in 1857, a very unassuming Father Mullally, who was one of the Irish Dominicans, went down to the basement to get potatoes. Now, I don't know if he got potatoes or whiskey, but he was from Ireland, so it must have been one of the two, right? Wink. Now, so he went down, he got a sack of potatoes, and where the potatoes laid, they were all in a big pile, right? So he dragged a sack off, and he saw something on the wall. And he looked, he came closer. It was very humid down there. And he looked closer and he said, wow, there's a tiny bit of color here. That's a fresco. What is this doing here in the basement? So he looked, and the fresco was just at the bottom of the cellar. So you have to imagine that there was a floor, and then the fresco was just kind of the top of the fresco there on the bottom. So he said, okay, well, there must be a deeper layer to this, because the fresco is evidently lower. So he took a pickaxe, he was Irish, took a pickaxe and he started kind of, picking down there, and he broke into a lower level that had hitherto not been discovered. And so what he unearthed is an original 4th century basilica of San Clemente. And it's very funny because Saint Jerome writes about the Basilica of San Clemente, and most people who read Saint Jerome in that time, they would have probably thought he meant the church upstairs, the 12th century one. Now, Saint Jerome was 3rd century, so how could he have, or 4th century, so how could he have known that church? So Saint Jerome was obviously not referencing that church, he was referencing this church, what we're looking at right now. So there is a whole nother complete basilica underneath the 12th century basilica. Okay, maybe now you're starting to understand why San Clemente is such an amazing church. So what we're entering now is the hallways of that basilica. Father Mullally took all of the dirt, all of the stones, the rocks, the dust. He took everything and he brought it outside. Okay, he kind of dumped it all outside the main entrance of San Clemente, and that's why San Clemente is also higher than Roman street level, as we saw, as you would see when you go there. So you have to kind of go steps up, and you're like, why do I have to go steps up to go into like a terrace, right? It's because it's built on dirt. And so he unearthed this beautiful 4th century basilica. So the humidity allowed the frescoes to survive. And so let's see what kind of things we can discover down here. Let's begin with the fresco that Father Mullally discovered last. Okay, so the newest one. And it's a very famous one, potentially the most famous one in the downstairs basilica, even though it doesn't really have much to do with St. Clement. But I'll tell you in a second why it's so important. So you see 3 people, 3 figures. One of them is Christ in the middle. If you ever have a doubt if someone is Christ, okay, there's a bunch of symbols that you can use to kind of test. And so in this case, Christ has a halo. Okay, but other saints have halos. Oh, wait, but there is something else. Christ is walking in this kind of almond-shaped, kind of like circle, right? It's like an almond-shaped, gigantic halo around his body. What is that? Well, that is a symbol of Christ as pan-creator, as the creator of everything. Why is it almond-shaped? Because it's actually 2 circles overlapping. The circle of the heavenly spheres and the circle of the earthly spheres, overlapping, creating this almond shape. Okay, so he is in the center of it. He is the center of the concentric circles of heaven and earth overlapping, because he's both. He's God and he's man, right? So Jesus Christ, very easy. At his crucifixion, he's already victorious. He is stepping down into the underworld. And on your way to the underworld, you have to overcome a bunch of demons. So he's stepping on a little naked demon who's spewing fire, right? He's like, ah! So Christ tramples in the gates of hell, or as they say, the gates of limbo, to descend and to get all of the righteous out. Who's the first righteous? Who's waiting there? Yup, this very same fruit guy that we talked about in the beginning, which is Adam. So this is Christ, the new man, reaching down to get the old man, Adam, out of limbo. So Adam here on the right, very happy to see Christ. Like, it's about time, I've been waiting here for some time now. So he's being received into paradise along with the other righteous souls of the Old Testament. Now, who's to the left? We don't know, but I can give an indication. It is an Eastern Rite monk. Okay, that's clear because he has the robe of a monk and he has the headband of a monk and he has a book in his hands. So it could be the person who painted this fresco. That's possible. In this case, we actually think it's someone else. Since it's an Eastern monk representation, we believe that this is Saint Cyril. Because most likely this is the first location of Saint Cyril's tomb, and this is why this fresco was here. So what Father Mullally unintentionally discovered was the tomb of one of the greatest saints of the church, Saint Cyril. And Saint Cyril and Methodius the apostles of the East, and if Bob is here, so I'm sure that he would chime in to tell you a little bit about the work of Cyril and Methodius, or Deborah can, whatever.
Well, the Russian patriarch, when he comes to Rome, a lot of the some of the Orthodox, they will go to this basilica and they will pray. It's their go-to, if you will, other than St. Peter's, and of course with, some of the great Eastern saints that are there.
Very good.
Jan, when Kirill was just a metropolitan in 2006, before he was elected Patriarch of all Russia in 2009, he visited Rome, and he was staying with traveling with the Council for Christian Unity in the Vatican, discussing interchurch relations between the Orthodox and the Catholics. And he asked specifically to go to San Clemente. And I was actually able to be there and walk through the church with him. And Cardinal Casper was the head of the Council for Christian Unity at the time. Yeah. And Kirill stopped and spent many minutes in front of the tomb, or the image and the icon of Cyril, which is the same name as Kirill. So Kirill wanted to see his namesake and venerate him in this church. And all across the Orthodox world, this is a sign and something to remember, that they love Rome because they have a veneration for many of the people buried in Rome, many of the saints. And this is because also that we were united for 1,000 years. The first 1,000 years, there was no such division between Catholic and Orthodox. Mm-hmm. All right, that's it.
Very nice. Very good. So we can move on. If you look a little bit further to the right of where we just stood, you can see Virgin Mary with child. And what is most interesting here, I think, is that the Madonna is clothed in imperial clothing. Since the Virgin Mary is the most important saint, and along with Christ, obviously, they would get the highest regalia that the Romans could imagine. What's the highest regalia the Romans could imagine? Obviously, the clothing and the symbols of the imperial family. So what you see here is an imperially dressed Virgin Mary with her son in an imperial toga with some parchment in his hand indicating the Gospels or the sacred scripture. So we can move on. And you can see there's just tons of very, very precious treasures in here. So this is the central nave then of the 4th century basilica of the original church of San Clemente. And yes, you can see the anchor on the altar in the very back, reminding us of this important saint and 4th pope. Now let's go to the left. Okay, from where we stand, let's go to the left a little bit further, and then to the left, and we can see a very interesting image. Deborah, if we can skip this one. Very good. Good. Well, that's just another view. Yep. And one more. We'll speak about this later.
Which one are we trying to get to?
The next one. Perfect. Thank you. Very good. So here, our two themes come together again. So we have Clement and we have St. Clement celebrating Mass. Now, we did want to address a little bit of the liturgy today, so I just want to link it back to those main themes, the patron saint of this church, as well as the liturgical action. And so for that, we have the restored version that is a little bit clearer to see. So what you would look at, or what we're looking at, is a complete wall taken up by fresco. It's absolutely stunning. Okay, absolutely stunning, because this is a fresco from the original medieval basilica, or sorry, well, no, I mean not medieval, early Christian basilica. Okay, from the 4th century, that has been restored. That's why the colors are so vibrant. Okay, the colors are not original, but everything else is original. And it has a couple of features that are extremely remarkable, not just for Catholics, but actually also just for linguists. Now, there are three parts. The top part is just kind of the lineup of all of the all-stars of the church. And we know this because we don't see their faces, but we do see the names, the titles underneath. One is Linus to the left. One is Petrus. One is Cletus to the right. And in the middle is San Clemente himself. So you got a lineup of the first popes. Now they're cut off because, as we've explained, there was a basilica up above and then the basement, and so the upper part was part of the wall and was somehow destroyed, taken off. So it's kind of ripped off, but you wouldn't actually be able to see further because there's a ceiling right now. Okay, above us is the ceiling. So what we see in the middle is a story, a very famous story of Saint Sicinius or Sicinius and Clement. So Sicinius was a Roman whose wife converted and became very jealous because his wife once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week, would leave and would go to meet with this weird group that call themselves the Christians. So Sicinius is like, I'm not sure what she's doing there, but usually a bunch of people getting together in a house in ancient Rome, not a good sign. So he got jealous and he followed her, and so he followed her into mass. That's what she was going to. She was going to mass. So Sicinius followed his wife, and so this is all under the Emperor Trajan, right? Her name was Theodora. So Theodora went in to the mass with San Clemente, and Sicinius, not being a Christian though, and kind of barged into mass, and so San Clement saw him and he immediately shut him up. And so Sicinius apparently lost the possibility to speak and to see, so he became blind and mute. Okay, and so what we can see here is in the middle, we're talking about the middle part of the fresco. In the middle we see Saint Clement celebrating mass, and then to the right we have a woman dressed in gold, very rich garment, Theodora, and next to her is this man who's slightly bent over with a purple vestment and a blue cope, and that is Sicinius. Now if you look closely, Sicinius is actually holding on to the arm of his servant because he can't see, so he can't say anything, and Theodora's like, you shouldn't have come here, I told you not to come here. Okay, and so Sicinius was punished for barging in, and so he had to be let out by his slave. So he's leaving, and St. Clement keeps celebrating mass. The story continues because Sicinius, being a very rich, very wealthy Roman, very powerful Roman, did not let that sit on his shoulders. So he came back eventually, and he wanted to drag Clement in front of the court. So when that happened, Clement disappeared, or he took the form of a column. So there's two versions of this. And so the slaves had to hurl a column away, and it was so heavy that they couldn't, right? So they just left him. But what we see is the moment when they drag the column and try to drag Clement in front of the court. So this is the lower part of what we're looking at now. And so you can see a slave to the left in blue and red carrying one part of the column, one slave, and then another slave holding the top of the column with a kind of a rope around it. And then you have Sicinius himself in his full imperial regalia, okay, calling them and telling them what to do. And now there's a couple of just mind-blowing things in here. The first is, this is a comic. Okay, they have actually speaking bubbles. Okay, if you look next to these figures, they all have text written next to them, and that's what they're actually saying in this moment. So this is like a first comic, okay? And the Christians were like, well, I mean, we gotta communicate somehow. So let's tell this story. And so they're saying stuff. And so what they're saying is, on the one hand, on the very far left, they say "Fallite diretto colo pallo," which means get behind the column, or get behind with a column, which is what this guy says, because he's kind of doing this work by himself. And then the other two are being insulted by Sicinius, who says "Fili delle pute traite," So that translated, I'm not going to translate that, but it means pull, you sons of, okay? You can fill in the blank here. So he's insulting his own slaves, right? And so he's saying, like, work harder, work harder. And so what does the column answer? The column being St. Clement, right? He says something. He's turned into a rock. He's really heavy, but he's still speaking. And so he says, Duritiam cores saxa trere meruistis. So, translated, because of the hardness of your heart, you have deserved to pull stones. So he's making a reference to the hardening of heart of these pagans. So that's the story that we see here. What's so fascinating about this? This is the oldest Italian writing that we know of. So this is a very poor Latin that could be already described as Italian. And so this is usually from Latin scholars accepted as the oldest writing of proper Italian. So that's why it's so famous, and that's why it's so interesting. Now, what is very neat, if we just kind of take a step back here, and I'm already over time, but what we take a step back is, what happens is the Christians tell the story of Saint Clement, making references to two prior events. One is Saint Paul. When he gets converted, he gets struck, he becomes blind, he becomes mute. In this case, though, it's not Clement, but it's the pagan who happens that, like St. Paul, right, when he was still Saul. And the hardness of the heart, where does that come from? That comes from Moses speaking to the Pharaoh. And so there are two references that already in the 4th century were so widely known and so clearly a topos, so a type of story, that they already used it to tell the story of St. Clement. Now, obviously, Sicinius and the pagans, the slaves, they had a difference, because Sicinius eventually did become a Christian. So the muteness was lifted, the blindness was lifted, he could see again, like Saul when he became Paul. He stopped persecuting the Christians, he became a Christian. The slaves did not, so their hearts stayed hardened. And this is also a reminder for every Christian that looks at that no matter what you do, it's always ultimately in the hands of God, right? You cannot by your own skill convert someone. It's God working in their hearts. And on the one hand, there are Siciniuses around whose hearts melt and become flesh and become Christian. And then you have hearts that just remain stones. And those people get to just hurl rocks for the rest of their existence. And so this is a beautiful reminder of these two stories that are involved in Clement's story. Now, before we go further, just one more thing. Bear with me. Thank you for your patience. Let's return back to the main center one, because here you have all elements of an early Christian worship. You have the church, you have the bishop, you have the prayer position that we talked about, right? Arms up, hand palms out, fingers extended, close together. You have the papal robe, you have a vestment, right? Maybe Bob later can explain the pallium, that white, well, it looks like a scapular, actually, talking about today on the Feast of the Scapular. It kind of looks like a scapular, right? Then he has a little fabric here in his hand for his sweat, which in the extraordinary form of the rite, the priest still has around his lower arm. And then on the table, on the altar, it's not an altar, it's a closed cubical platform, so an altar, a table for Mass. He has the Eucharist, he has some ampullae, so some water and wine, and he has the book, Sacred Scripture. And there you have, in the 4th century, a representation of St. Clement, the 4th Pope, celebrating Mass. And so this is basically all elements that we already spoke about, but kind of all concised, right, packed into one in this beautiful, beautiful fresco. So I just wanted to make that footnote, because we are talking about liturgical symbolism. So I figured.
That was wonderful, Jan. So it's the 4th century, this basilica, the level that we're in right now.
Yeah,
so
correct.
do we know the date approximately of this mosaic?
It's not a mosaic. It's a fresco.
I mean, a fresco.
That's
I'm
why
sorry.
it needs to be restored. No, it's fine. No, but that's why it's kind of in this shabby
Right.
condition, or it was in a shabby condition. It's around the time of the building of the basilica, so it would be that the exact date. I'm not sure if we know the exact date. No, I don't think that we do.
Okay. So we'll go back then. And I can't. It's completely
So
locked.
whenever you have an Italian or Latin, a friend that really is into that stuff, then you do want to bring up, or you do want to show them this fresco. This makes all Latin hearts beat higher. Not mine, but it's just there's just some people who really get a kick out of this. So, and it is fascinating. I love the little comics. It's like, yep, they did the same thing that we do today. It's just not the Avengers and the Marvel universe, but it's still like the universe of the Christian saints. So, with all of their individual superpowers.
So we're having some technical issues right now, so I'm sorry.
That's not a problem. Well, are there any questions? Maybe we can use the time already to insert some questions before we go further. You can type them, or Bob, you can chime in.
Well, I think, as usual, you've done a very thoughtful job of taking us around the early sites in Rome. And I guess I would only comment that the marvelous thing about Rome is that you've got about 8 or 10 levels of history at every corner,
Yes.
at every piazza, at every church. This church has a lower church, and it has a pagan shrine to Mithras, and then it has an upper church from the 1100s, a lower church from the 300s. And then you've got the Irish Dominicans who have been here. And one of my best friends in Rome was an Irish Dominican who lived in San Clemente. He passed away. He was the prefect of the Vatican Library, Father Leonard Boyle. And I appreciated him very, very much. He was a wonderful man. He was a paleographer. That is, paleo means old, and grapher means writing. He was a scholar of old writing, and he helped me read manuscripts. And he always helped the students and the young scholars who were studying the Vatican Library, almost like he had been a professor at the Toronto Medieval Studies Institute. And then he was in Rome during the 1980s and 90s. He died at the end of the 90s. So he lived in San Clemente. So I have fond memories of San Clemente. So thank you for taking us there.
Very nice. Of course. So Deborah, maybe we can go further, and we can actually descend into the lower. There was a question that I picked up here on the right, is what was the line underneath the second fresco? And that was a line of dedication by the artist. So the artist, it was done by a couple, actually a noble couple of Roman artists. And so her name was Maria Macellaria. And so she left and a dedication underneath, and it says, paraphrase, it says, Maria Macellaria made this for the glory of God and the honor of Clement, if I'm not mistaken. So here you can, the writing here that starts with Eco Beno Dera, and then you can see Rapizza, and Rapizza was the last name, Maria Macellaria Rapizza, and the man was Beno Rapizza. So those are the two artists. And then it says both. See, there you go. It says Beno e Rapizza cum Maria. So it's Beno and Maria Rapizza made this, and then it has a bunch of abbreviations, so I would have to look those up. But it's a dedication to Saint Clement. The Clement is at the very, very end of the line. So to the honor of Saint Clement, most likely. So I hope that answers your question. This is Linda Smith. So very good. Let's go further than that, because we're running out of time here. There you go. There's just a very cute story, so I can just briefly mention this. No, one more back. Sorry. Thank you. This is the finding of this miraculous shrine. Clement was drowned, in the Crimean Sea, as I said. And so here, this is a moment where they try to find the exact spot where he was drowned before he was buried on land. And so a little boy, kind of, poor kid, he stepped to the water, and like this kind of rip curl kind of dragged him underwater. And so his parents were freaking out, and everyone around there was freaking out. But then he called from like this hollow space. And so someone actually dove under the water and entered this crypt that apparently miraculously was formed around Clement's body. And so what we see here is the moment where they rediscover that crypt. So the bishop of the town to the left with his crozier, and then you have the mother with her boy in arms, being very happy that they found each other again. And then you have the mother picking her boy up. You have the anchor to the right, a red anchor, and then you have the little miraculous crypt, which is in the water. So you can see around it is water, stylized water with fish and jellyfish and octopus and stuff. So it's a cute story. But this is this is the finding of the relics of St. Clement before they're brought back to Rome in the Crimean Sea. So very good. Now we can descend. I'm going to take you one story, well, two stories actually down. So 30 feet further down underground, where we go to the first century Rome level. And now you kind of have to think about it. You're like, first century, wait a second. You mean like the time of Caesar and Augustus and Peter and stuff? And yes. There is, and this was also discovered by Father Mullally, there is, after those approximately 40 steps down into, now we're at about 90% humidity, okay, there is a whole Roman street which is preserved underneath the 4th century Basilica. Father Mullally found it because he heard water, and so he dug deeper to see where the water source is. And in fact, there was a water source which is still there today. So when you go, then you can hear the water all the way through this Roman street. And that Roman street somehow got enclosed in some dirt and was completely preserved. There's about 8 rooms, as we saw previously in the floor plan, and then a tiny temple with an antechamber and a dining room, okay, all from the 1st century. In fact, and I'm sorry to do this to you, this must hurt. In fact, the walls of these 1st century buildings probably date back to a Republican building, so even older than the 1st century. We go into the BC now. 1st, 2nd century BC. Absolutely mind-blowing. We do not know what these buildings were used for. We know this, what I'm going to talk about in 1 second. We think it was a gold mint for Nero's golden house, but it's very hard to tell. And the idea of the mint was because there was a water source, and the only buildings that you would build to water sources where you would actually need water in the workshop. So, and you can see the rooms here have no clear identifier. Anyways, last thing, and then we're gonna end, and we can ask questions. So give me just 1 minute. Is what we see is a Mithraeum. So this is an ancient Oriental mystery cult to Mithra, which was incredibly famous among the Roman soldiers. Why is that? Because Mithra was himself kind of a warrior god. He was kind of a Hercules type, okay, so very strong, like youthful and powerful and energetic, and soldiers identified themselves with him. In fact, the whole creation story of the Mithrae cult implies that Mithra set out to put order into chaos and to do it with force, with power and with force and with conviction. So soldiers kind of saw themselves doing that, right? They go off into the and cultivate and civilize the barbarians, so they could identify with this strange Herculean god that put chaos to order by force. Now, what you see here then is Mithra himself on this little kind of altar, and this is a pagan altar, so they would have dinner banquets here. And you can see it's relatively small, so it would host about like maybe 10 people max. They would lay on each side, right? And then you have the little rim. You have like a step down, you have a little rim. So that's the rim on which the food would be placed that the slaves brought in from the antechamber, the other image that we just saw from that room. They would prepare it, and then they would bring it in here. And so they would pray to Mithra. They would, drink tons of alcohol, and then, eat all the food, and then God knows what. After that, okay, so it's a Mithraic cult, and so it has the Mithraic dining chamber, it has the antechamber, and a small adjacent chamber as well. It's very interesting, maybe just that as a closing to Mithra, to the Mithraic cult, especially after the 2nd century, so the year 200 plus, the Roman religion as such was already very decrepit. And no one really believed in those gods anymore. Okay, like no one believed in Mars and Venus and their existence. What they believed in is the power, the powers that they had. There was a power of war, a power of peace, and all of that. But like no one actually thought that Mars was actually up there in the clouds somewhere, like lounging on a cloud. And if we behave badly, he'll come down and bring war. No one believed that. But what did grow is the internalization of the search for meaning. So these Romans, they didn't have any belief. So after death, everything's over. So they started rubbing shoulders with all of these weird Far Eastern and Near Eastern mystery cults, which were tons of fun. Okay, you'd get together, you had tons of fun, you'd sing, you'd eat, you'd do whatever. And, and you just be together, and you kind of really feel that you have some kind of mystic esoterical experience, that you're experiencing something more than just material reality. And especially soldiers who had a pretty dull and hard and, life full of hardship and were not super rich up until the end of their life when they were paid off and settled down. They loved that. They're like, well, this is something that we can actually look forward to coming home, right? It's pure hedonism because obviously none of these gods exists. But it's very interesting to see that even in Rome, you already had this yearning for an interior meaning and meaning of life and internalization and prayer and this try to connect to God in some way, try to connect to some transcendental power. And I think Mithraism is a great example, studying this yearning developing even in an ancient pagan religion such as the very cold, rational Roman religion. So with that, obviously Christians had easy game because they're like, hey guys, we got some news for you, and they're good news. Right? There is a transcendental reality, and it's not full of weird chaos warriors, but it is full of love and mercy. So I just wanted to kind of add that on. All right, I have been over time, so if you have questions, obviously you can post those.
First, but we're going to go to the end, and we're going to ask Father Tony if he would lead us in a closing prayer. And I'll let you explain where we are, Jan.
Yes, so this is the actual altar to Cyril and Methodius, and so you see a mosaic of Cyril and some commemorative plaques for the different Eastern Christian denominations that came and churches that came to visit. And so this is an image of Saint Cyril, who was buried in these halls, and John Paul II visiting and praying. So it's a great place to actually take a little break and reflection.
So here is the actual mosaic.
This is Saint Cyril,
Mm-hmm.
or Saint Cyril, as we say.
So it's a up close of what we see above the altar.
And the letters there are Cyrillic, as Maria could tell us. That's why they look, well, at the bottom, it's Latin, in memoriam of the apostles to Saint Cyril and educators, Saint Cyril to the Bulgarian people, 869, 1929. So that's the same. This is an image in thanks to Saint Cyril and Methodius for evangelizing and giving the alphabet and learning to the Bulgarian, to the tribes in Bulgaria.
Okay, Father Tony.
Is he here?
He needs to unmute, Father Tony.
There you are.
Okay.
Good. Well, I've just been fascinated. Thank you, Dr. Bentz. We've mentioned so many saints today: St. Clement, St. Cyril and Methodius, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, St. Simon Stock with the scapular today, the day he received the scapula from Our Lady. And of course, being in Assisi in this very moment, I'm going to walk to the Basilica in a few minutes. They have a special prayer service on this evening for Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and I will remember each one of you, your families, in my prayer there. So I think it's appropriate again to finish with a variation of the prayer that Francis spoke to his brother Leo in La Verna. Let us pray. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he turn his face on you and give you his peace. May he give you also his joy, his love, and his protection. May he be with you now at this hour and every moment of your life, at the moment when you close your eyes in order to open them to him, to his glory. May he be with you. May he bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.